Welcome to these special new episodes of Balado, a podcast for students of the University of Ottawa Faculty of Law Common Law section. I'm Professor Kyle Kirkup, and I'm the director of the first year program and the English Common Law Orientation Coordinator. Back in 2020, I sat down with Professor Lynda Collins to talk about happiness in law school, something that at the time felt like a radical conversation. Since then, Professor Collins has published a new book that builds on those ideas. It's called How to Succeed and Stay Human in Law School, and it offers students an evidence-based and compassionate roadmap for thriving, not just surviving law school. There are copies available in the Brian Dixon Law Library at the University of Ottawa. In this new book, she argues that happiness isn't a distraction from academic success. It's often the foundation for it. Drawing on research, she offers a clear message. When students feel good, they learn better, think more clearly, and perform at a higher level. In this first episode, we're looking at how happiness and performance are deeply connected and how small, intentional changes to how we treat our minds and bodies can lead to big results. In a law school culture that often normalizes stress, sleep deprivation, and constant overwork, Professor Collins offers a different path, one where rest, nutrition, and movement aren't distractions, but powerful tools for success. This episode is an invitation to rethink what it means to do well in law school, not just in terms of marks, but in how we feel and who we become along the way. Take a listen to our conversation from 2020. Professor Lynda Collins is a leader in the law and public policy of toxic torts. After graduating as gold medalist from Osgoode Hall Law School, Professor Collins practiced in San Francisco and with EcoJustice Canada. Professor Collins then earned her LLM at UBC Law. She also appeared before the Standing Environment Committees at the House of Commons and the Senate. Most recently, Professor Collins served in the role of co-chair of Ontario's Toxics Reduction Scientific Expert Panel. As a member of the University of Ottawa Faculty of Law's Centre for Environmental Law and Global Sustainability, Professor Collins uses her expertise in the field of toxic torts and environmental human rights law to bring about positive change. Professor Collins, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
So you've become interested in studying happiness and the law, and you even have a first-year seminar in winter 2021 called Happiness and the Law. And the course description says human happiness is arguably one of the underlying drivers of law and legal systems. Yet legal systems often overlook the central human need and desire, and lawyers. Can you unpack this for us a little?
Yeah, sure. So I guess the point of that course description is just to say that I think, in fact, our desire for our own happiness and the happiness of others is actually at the very foundation of law. That law is a social tool that we collectively developed in order to allow people to live good lives, to be free from violence and cruelty, to have the full scope to express ourselves and become who we want to be. When you think about human rights, they're really all about that, to be free from suffering, and then on the flip side, to be happy. And yet, this can get really lost in law school and in legal practice. And as you probably know, in fact, we've learned over the years that law students and lawyers have significantly higher than average mental health problems. So teaching that course and talking about this more widely is just my effort to try to reinsert that happiness driver into our legal lives.
And was there anything that, kind of motivated you to study this, or was it, just something you were noticing in the way that we as legal professionals approach questions? We're often taught, look for the reasoning of a decision, but maybe we don't attend to the emotions of a decision or the underlying meanings of a decision. Is there something motivating this question?
I mean, a couple of different things. On the one hand, my area of research is environmental law, And scholars in that field have been thinking about this for a while. So, for example, we've found that people that are happy buy less. They have less need to consume. And there's a lot of discussion in the sustainability world about creating more meaningful lives as an alternative to overconsumption. So that's kind of one stream. You may have heard of the very famous book, Small is Beautiful. There's a whole scholarship around that, an activist community around that. But really, I got interested in law school actually from my first year of teaching. I'm not sure where this came from, but sort of out of the blue, I decided as a brand new teacher that my pedagogical approach would be excellence without suffering. And then about 10 years later, when I served as first year director for 4 years, I began to research this more. And in particular, I stumbled across some interdisciplinary research coming out of the States on the pedagogy of hope in law schools, where a psych professor and a law professor got together and did an empirical study of how law professors can actually engender hope in their students. But what fascinated me about that and led to a ton more research, which led to that course that I'm teaching, is that they actually found that when students are happier, they perform better academically.
I feel like as soon as you say that, the first question that's going to emerge from any student that's listening to this podcast is, okay, like how do I do that? What are some strategies that I can keep in my back pocket as
Yeah.
I make my entry into law and into the legal profession?
Yes. So the first thing that I want to do is make a plug for a few books that are very fun, very readable, that anybody could pick up in the summer as you prepare for law school. One of them is called The Happy Lawyer, and it's produced by Oxford University Press. And it gathers up all the data in a very digestible form. There's another one called How to Be Sort of Happy in Law School that I also think is really useful. It was written by a professor of sociology who did her JD at Stanford. And then actually my favorite is a non-legal book called The Happiness Advantage by Sean Achor. That's Achor. And you can find Sean's excellent TED Talk online as well. But basically, there's some fairly simple building blocks that are probably going to seem really obvious, and for that reason, they are often neglected. Law students in particular, because you're very smart, tend to think that if something is extremely simple, that it can't possibly be valuable. But in fact, the data shows that some of the most significant drivers of happiness are the most obvious. For example, sleep. Law students habitually believe that it's in their best interest to sacrifice sleep. They think that by doing that, they're going to actually increase GPA. The academic research shows the opposite. In fact, we're all much smarter when we sleep. But also, sleep deprivation is a significant driver of anxiety and depression. So if you're at that stage, at 10 o'clock at night, and you're deciding whether to finish that reading for your 8:30 class or go to bed, actually the research would suggest you might be better off to just go to bed. Not only will you be happier, less likely to have anxiety and depression, but you'll retain more of what you have read, and your brain is more ready to learn for the next day. So sleep. Exercise. Again, so obvious, you've heard this message, for your whole lives, but mostly we think about exercise as being something that's important for our bodies. And again, law students tend to have this, very courageous, but in fact counterproductive belief that, well, I'll just sacrifice my body for these 3 years. I'll neglect my exercise routine, and then one day I'll get back into it. In fact, once again, first of all, the researchers have found exercise improves academic outcomes, but definitely it is crucial for mental health. So there's a whole bunch of studies showing that exercise, in fact, can be as effective as some of the most commonly used prescription psychiatric drugs for dealing with anxiety and depression. So exercise. Nutrition. Again, I'm going to start sounding like a broken record. We can really tend to neglect this. And, it's not just law students. I think any law professor can identify with what I'm saying too. But good nutrition can be so helpful for mental health. There was one study that took people who were eating no vegetables, so, unusual, but maybe not in the middle of exams. And they brought them up to 5 to 8 servings of vegetables a day, and the happiness increase was this equivalent to going from unemployment to employment. which is one of the most significant drivers they've found sort of in the general population. Employed people are much happier than unemployed people. So, these three basics, if you could commit to sleep, exercise, and good nutrition in law school, you're way ahead of the game. After that, one of the most important things that I heard over and over again as I watched films by positive psychologists, read the peer-reviewed studies, was social connection. I read a number of researchers that are very eminent in their fields who said, if they could know one thing about you to predict your happiness, it would be your degree of social connection. So, it's so counterintuitive for our students who are such high achievers and such hard workers, but actually to take that time and go to a movie with your best friend might be the most significant thing you can do for your success that week, because it's going to put you in a positive framework, which is going to make your brain work better.
Other thing that I wanted to talk about a little bit was relationships during law school. I went to law school in a relationship, and I stayed in that relationship. And
Congratulations.
Oh, thank you. But I hear sometimes, I hear from students who say, "Oh my goodness, it's so challenging to have time for, a partner or for family members or for my communities." I'm guessing you have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, definitely. A big part of that is your own self-care, because it's well known and perfectly understandable that when we're anxious in particular, we become more self-centered, right? The survival brain is kicking in. And if you think about our evolution, if you're running from a saber-toothed tiger, this is not the time to think about world peace. It's quite important to be self-focused. And that's what happens when we're anxious. We tend to be more controlling. We tend to be more bossy. We tend to be more irritable. So all of the things that we've already talked about, think about your sleep, or you're playing your video game, or playing your guitar as like a noble deed that you're doing for the people that you love, because as you cultivate your own equilibrium, relationships will be so much easier to maintain and to enjoy. And also, I think if you can remind yourself that those relationships are not inconsistent with your legal success, in fact, they're crucial to your legal success. And if you need any motivation on this, there's a great TED Talk on the longest running study of human happiness, which comes out of Harvard. The study, I think, is still ongoing, and it's been about 70 years. And that study, the author said, if I could boil it down to one primary driver of happiness, it's love, it's relationships. And I don't just mean romantic relationships, friendship and community and family and romantic relationships. So, and those are people graduating from Harvard who have many of the same drivers as many of you do. They were overachievers, and, maybe type A. But ultimately, what really mattered in their lives, like nobody gets to the end of their life and thinks, I wish I could have won one more case. People feel grateful for the difference they made in their children's lives, or, that time they went to Europe with their best friend or whatever. And I'm not saying that your career won't be incredibly important to you. It will, but it'll be more important to you if it is consistent with your values. It'll be more important to you if it's something that you honestly enjoyed. And yeah, I just think law school is a great 3-year opportunity to develop those skills, Develop them now. Learn your breathing technique now, so that it's there when you're about to go into your first murder trial. I always tell my students, fear is a part of lawyering, and you're human. So it's learning how to be with that, to be kind to yourself, and to manage it, to breathe through it, so that your voice is a little bit more steady and you're thinking a little bit more clearly. And yeah, I just think it's to me, I think the emotional piece is as important as learning to write. It's one of the basic building blocks of lawyering.
Yeah, and you mentioned, self-kindness, and I also think of kindness to others in law school, right? I try to remind in my small group, be kind to yourself and be kind to the people around you. So do you have any thoughts on you're going into an environment where it's competitive and it's challenging and it feels high stakes, and there's all these really smart people around you, and you're trying to navigate those connections and relationships. What do you think that looks like in law school?
Yeah, I actually think this is an area where our students really excel. And personally, maybe I'm obviously biased, but I actually think the University of Ottawa is very special in that regard. When I chat with colleagues from other schools, I think we do stand out, in fact, for our highly collaborative atmosphere. I've been teaching for 15 years, and I only feel every year a greater and greater sense of admiration for my students, for the way that they do support each other, and the joy and the community that they really do find. In fact, I've had several students tell me they found more community in law school than they ever had in undergrad. If they went to a big school or in classes of 1,000. So I think our students are quite good at that. But if you find, which especially happens if we're going into anxiety or depression, if you find that you're self-isolating, it can be good to just remember, reaching out to a friend's like brushing my teeth. That's like basic self-care, And as we care for each other, obviously, we all feel better. Like it really is, and the research shows this, something that benefits everybody. It's a really lovely thing about human nature. That I read one study where, oxytocin, the feel-good hormone, they did a study where people observed others performing acts of kindness. And they found the person who performs the act of kindness, the recipient, and the observer all have increases in that feel-good hormone. So you're just doing a real favor to yourself and to everybody when you act with kindness. And of course, crucial to remember, law school is short. Your career is long. These are your future colleagues. You'd be shocked how many opportunities have come my way because people liked working with me. I'm not being self-deprecating. I had something to bring to the table intellectually, obviously. But, there's a lot of smart people in law. And when they have the option to work with somebody who's nice to them versus somebody who's difficult, who do they choose,
Yeah, and thinking of people in my small group, Rachel Leck, our assistant dean, is now in the law school, and 14 years after we graduate, there she is, and we also remember the people who were more challenging in the law
Yes.
school environment, and
Yeah,
we remember that we never want to work with them. So
indeed.
it's something that definitely
You could
stays
be
with you.
interviewing with anybody in your small group. That's a realistic possibility. And even if you're at the same level, firms are really interested in knowing the personality of candidates because, you live with these people. My mom said to me growing up, most of your waking hours at work, you need to be happy. And a lot of firms feel that way. So even if somebody is just at your level, if you have personal knowledge of that person, they're going to really rely on that. So yeah, for sure you start building your reputations. And like, obviously I'm not suggesting that you fake it, but I just think it's a good investment to be kind. And even when we're feeling grouchy, and there may be days where you say something unkind to somebody and like it's just really worth circling back to apologize and to let them know where you were coming from.
Thanks so much for joining us for this conversation with Professor Lynda Collins, the author of the new book, How to Succeed and Stay Human in Law School. On next week's episode, we talk about mindfulness, about going back to the basics, centering the brain and the body. I hope you'll tune in.